Thank you very much, Mr. Housen. Good afternoon, brother. Well, I've been thinking about work a lot lately, for various reasons, actually. This week, I transitioned back to school. I started my week at Walmart and spent the next 3 days at school. And yesterday, I got the day off, actually, thankfully. But I was just preparing for the kids. And then Kelly's been very busy this summer with projects from her clients all over the United States. I've been helping her a little bit with that. Claire is actually looking for her first job right now. So if you know any leads, let us know. And Reagan starts a new job tomorrow, as a matter of fact. And both Reagan and Olivia have started taking classes, to embark on new career fields. So I've been thinking about work in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different reasons lately. And it's been pretty busy around our house, but really that's not unusual, because working takes up a large percentage of the average adult's life, at least in America. According to the American Time Use Survey released by the U.S. Department of Labor in June, 87% of full-time employed people worked on an average weekday, compared with 29% on an average weekend day in 2024. Full-time employed people averaged 8.4 hours of work on weekdays they worked, and 5.6 hours on weekend days they worked. So if you do the math using these Bureau of Labor Statistic numbers, two things become apparent. The typical full-time employee in America spends over a third of his or her ordinary weekday on the job. And that adds up to many years devoted to work over the course of one's life. Despite what many think, most people are actually satisfied with their jobs too. According to the Pew Research Center's 2024 survey on job satisfaction, half of U.S. workers are extremely or very satisfied with their jobs. 38% are somewhat satisfied, and only 12% are not very or not at all satisfied with their jobs. So I find these numbers encouraging. And it reinforces something I have believed about work for a long time. Work is not only a good thing, it is actually a gift from God. Today, we are going to briefly explore the spiritual benefits of work. There are three main points I'd like to consider in this sermonette. Point number one, God is a worker, and he gave us work as a gift to help us reflect his nature. God is a worker, and he gave us work as a gift to help us reflect his nature. Point number two, work is useful in developing Christian character within us now, in the here and now. So point number two, work is useful in developing Christian character within us now. And point number three, work prepares us for our future roles in God's kingdom. Point three, work prepares us for our future roles in God's kingdom. Let's start with our first point. God is a worker, and work is a gift. The very first verse of the Bible reveals the truth in this statement. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." By the way, we're using the English Standard Version today. I think Joe's probably already on that, but I forgot to mention that to him. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So right away, we see God was engaged in the act of creation. Now let's move forward a chapter to Genesis 2, and we'll read verses 1 through 3. Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. And we'll look at these scriptures, which we usually read to emphasize the importance of the Sabbath. However, excuse me, I need to take a quick drink. And it's good that we usually read these passages to emphasize the importance of the Sabbath, because God did not intend us to be workaholics. He doesn't want us to be slaves to work. We're supposed to find a work-life balance in everything. But I wanted to look at these verses today, and I wanted to emphasize the number of times that God's work is brought up in these verses. So again, let's turn to Genesis 2, and we'll read verses 1 through 3. Genesis 2, verse 1. "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So we can see from these verses that God, by his very divine nature, is a worker and creator. And since we were made in his image, he designed us to be as well. Exodus 34:21 says, "We shall labor 6 days before resting on the seventh." So there is an expectation that the natural order of things involves people working. Indeed, Genesis 2, verse 15 tells us that, and we'll take a look at this verse, Genesis 2:15. It tells us that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. So here we can see that mankind was created to work with God in the world, and the work was not hard or painful at that time. It was a blessing. That did change a bit, however, after Adam and Eve sinned. If we move forward to Genesis 3, verses 17 through 19, we see how work became harder for people upon God's judgment. Genesis 3, verse 17. "And to Adam he said, 'Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return.'" So the first lesson here is not to listen to your wives, men. No, I'm just kidding. That is not the first lesson here. And there will be judgment upon me later for my haughtiness. But these I love you, honey. These verses do reveal, though, the serious consequences of Adam and Eve's sin. Not only were people now subject to death, which was the most serious penalty mentioned here, but they were also sentenced to toil and hardship until they died. Nevertheless, that does not change the fact that human beings were originally created to carry on God's work. And in doing so, we still reflect God's nature in ourselves, even if that work is much more painful or challenging than it otherwise might have been had we stayed obedient to God. Psalm 19, verse 1 says the following: "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." Remember, brethren, that you proclaim God's handiwork in the world as part of his creation. So work in a manner that is worthy of reflecting his glory. When we work like that, we will also be developing Christ-like qualities within ourselves, which brings us to our second point. We know from John 1, verses 1 through 3, that Christ was actively involved in the creation described in the opening chapters of Genesis. And in Genesis 1, verse 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image." So we were made by God and the Word, Jesus Christ, in their image to carry on their work on earth, as the Word made clear when he came to us in the flesh. Turn, if you will, to John 4, and this time we'll read verses 34 through 38. John 4, verses 34 through 38. Here Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, 'There are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest'? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you did not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor." In our labor or employment, we can and will develop many of the same qualities Jesus demonstrated in his time on earth. First of all, working can teach us patience. Think of how patient Christ was with his disciples, who often failed to understand what he was trying to communicate to them. Even after years of being with him, they still didn't get it, and sometimes it frustrated Christ. But he was patient, and that patience is something we should model as well. Jesus also demonstrated the ability to work with others. He helped all kinds of peoples, Samaritans, Romans. He even helped people who were trying to arrest him. You remember he healed the guard's ear after it was cut off by Peter. So Christ worked with everyone, and he learned how to work with all kinds of people in all kinds of circumstances, even very stressful circumstances. Jesus displayed loyalty. Jesus displayed loyalty in his interactions with his disciples. He loved his flock. John, the disciple, in fact, who we were just in the chapter from John, was the disciple he loved. Peter, he showed loyalty to. He made him the rock, despite Peter's denial. Christ showed great loyalty, and we too can develop a sense of loyalty with the people we work with. Jesus showed perseverance. He overcame many hardships and many trials. He overcame Satan. Satan tempted him in the wilderness, and he overcame that. And of course, he overcame death at the resurrection. So Christ's perseverance can be a model for us, because sometimes we have hard jobs. It can be difficult to get up day to day and go to work. But, we can take his example and persevere as a result of it. And Christ showed the ability to follow instructions in others. He was following God's will. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to go through that torture, but he followed through with it anyway. He followed through with it because he knew it was what God's will was, and that we needed that. We needed his resurrection for salvation. And we too, hopefully we never have to go through anything that serious, but we too can learn how to follow instructions at work and follow others just as Christ followed God's will. And that will help us be better disciples in the future too. So our jobs, therefore, help serve as training for our roles as Christ's ambassadors. And it really doesn't matter what those jobs may be, because they can all strengthen us and bring us closer to God. Even though many of us, like most people in the world, may identify ourselves by the work that we do. I'm a nurse, I'm a farmer, I'm a mechanic, I'm a police officer, etc., etc. We must be mindful of the fact that as Christians, our most important role is that of a modern-day disciple. As Matthew 10, verse 17 reminds us, it even trumps the job of a homemaker and parent, which is also a rule that uniquely prepares people for discipleship while being instrumental in guiding future generations on the path that they should take. The importance of that rule was acknowledged by Paul in 2 Timothy 1:5 when he gave a shout out to Timothy's grandmother Lois and mother Eunice for their influence, the influence they had on Timothy's life. So Christ reminds us how special we are to him and the Father in John 14, verses 12 through 14. So John 14, 12 through 14, you're probably right there. Christ said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it." So, brethren, let us use our labors as an opportunity to develop the Christ-like qualities that will bring his light into this sin-darkened world. Finally, let's not forget that our work here is only a precursor to what God has in store for us in the kingdom. Our work here is really just a precursor for what God has in store for us in the kingdom. Staying in John 14, verses 1 through 3, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be." So as we partake in our labors, let us keep in mind that we ultimately do not work for whomever employs us, but we work for the Lord, our Heavenly Father's director of human resources, from whom we surely do not want to receive a termination notice. In Revelation 22, verses 10 through 15, Jesus said to John, "Do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near. Let the evildoer still do evil, and the filthy still be filthy, and the righteous still do right, and the holy still be holy. Behold, I am coming soon, bringing my recompense with me to repay each one for what he has done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and end. Blessed are those who wash their robes, so that they may have the right to the tree of life, and that they may enter the city by the gates. Outside are the dogs and sorcerers and the sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood." It's an understatement to say that it would be sad to be left outside the city gates and cut off from the tree of life when Christ returns to establish his kingdom on earth. So use your time wisely now and work well so that you're prepared when he comes. This kind of reminds me of a story. A couple weeks ago, I was working at Walmart. It was late at night. At night, all the kids kind of come to Walmart and hang out in the parking lot because there's not much to do in Ashland. And I'm sitting there sweeping, the sidewalks in the parking lot for cigarette butts. I'm just removing the cigarette butts. A lot of people smoke going in and out of Walmart, and some of our workers there smoke too. So I'm sweeping the butts, and some kid in a silver pickup truck drives by and sticks his head out the window and says, "Man, they got to give you a better job. They got you out here sweeping." He's like a teenage kid or college-age kid. But nobody asked me to do that. I was just doing it because I was done with my other work, and I was still on the clock. I don't want to stand around and waste the employer's money, so I picked up a broom and I started cleaning up. And, I do have a better job. I'm a teacher. I make more money than that kid's going to make for a long time, perhaps. And, but my most important job is as Christ's disciples. And Christ came to earth. He stripped himself of his divinity, came to earth as a worker, as a common man doing common jobs. And if that's not a step down from somebody's, normal position, I don't know what is. He was creator of heaven and earth, and he worked as a man, toiled as a man, and even did slave jobs like washing people's feet. So it's not too much for me to sweep a sidewalk. Whatever your job is, it's not too much for you. It's not below you to do it. If somebody's willing to pay you an honest wage and you're willing to do it, it teaches you humility. It teaches you Christ-like qualities. And, it kind of reminded me of that. So, and in fact, Mr. Gregory and I were having a conversation a couple weeks ago. He was talking about how many people don't like their jobs, and because sometimes they're mundane and boring. And we were talking about how this would be a good opportunity to expand your mind. You can think while you're in those kind of jobs. In fact, I've often written some of my best sermons came from those types of jobs, or I'm just doing repetitive work, but I'm thinking about other things at that time, and I come up with good ideas. And Mr. Gregory was talking about how he did the same in his jobs. In society today, there are too many people who find reasons not to work. Work is an important thing to do, and it really hurts them and it hurts society as a whole. They don't develop the qualities and the character that they need to, that Christ and God intended us to develop as his people, as his creations. And you could just look at Proverbs for all the warnings about laziness. You've heard the old axiom, idle hands are the devil's workshop. That's not an exact quote from the Bible, but the principle is repeated many times in Proverbs. And Paul reinforced that principle too in Thessalonians 3:10 when he talked about how those who don't work shouldn't eat. So it's an important thing. Work is an important thing, and it's a good thing. It makes us more like God our Father. It makes us more like Christ our brother. So in conclusion, brethren, when you are gainfully employed or unemployed or retired, you still have work to do as Christ's followers, which is the most important job you'll ever have anyway. All of our other labors serve as preparation for our roles as future leaders in God's kingdom. So prepare your duties faithfully, using Jesus as your example and guide. I'll leave you with words of wisdom about work from two of the wisest men in the Bible. In Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, Ecclesiastes 3, verses 12 and 13. King Solomon wrote, "I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man." And then Paul in Colossians 3, verses 23 through 25, Paul says, "Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality." Work well, brethren, but first, enjoy the rest of your Sabbath.